Okay, good afternoon. We're going to start the next panel. So what we have now, and this is following on from our earlier panels and our keynote from Dr. Geist, we have a panel on security and privacy, and it'll be moderated by Lisa Habrock, founder of Wicked Ideas. She's an award-winning journalist and entrepreneur, former business journal editor and political columnist with the Telegraph Journal. She's the co-founder, along with Dr. John McLaughlin, of 21 Leaders for the 21st Century, the precursor to 21 Inc. She's currently the founder of Wicked Ideas, a new knowledge-based company that helps build community trust by reframing public conversations around complex public issues. We have three invited panelists: Anne Bertrand, Dr. Michael Geist, and Jamie Rees, and Lisa will introduce each of them. The panelists will have around 10 minutes for presentations. There'll be time for discussion from the panel, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions from the floor. And I'll encourage you to participate in that way. I think we've discussed that if you feel more comfortable asking questions from your seat, just please speak up, and the question will be repeated for the tape. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Lisa.
Well, it doesn't need to be on, quite frankly. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Rablock. Easiest last name to remember. You just have to remember only the H is silent, and you can sound out the rest. It is a pleasure to be hosting the after lunch panel with my three esteemed experts on privacy and access. So we are going to do the 21st century equivalent of the long drag on the awesome cigarette. We are not actually going to stand at all for the next hour, which I understand is what is silently killing all of us. And so we're going to have a lovely little conversation to start, and then we want you to join this conversation. So don't worry about that microphone. We've all got great hearing, and I think we all can carry a voice through the room. We're happy to repeat any question you have from the floor. So if you've got a question, just put your hand up. We'll call out to you, and you can join our conversation up here, which I hope will be lovely and lively. So on our panel today, we have, of course, Dr. Michael Geist, and I'm sure most of you were here for his fabulous morning presentation. For those of you who missed it, he holds a bachelor, 2 masters, and a doctorate degree in the study of law. He has been one of Canada's top 40 under 40, has been one of Canadian lawyers, 25 most influential lawyers in Canada. He focuses on intellectual property law. He has written or edited 6 books, and he writes a column for the Toronto Star, and also for the Hill Times and the Tyee. Beside him, we have Anne Bertrand, who is the first ever Access to Information and Privacy Commissioner of New Brunswick. Yay. She oversees the Right to Information and Protection of Privacy Act and the Personal Health Information Privacy and Access Act. Wow, that's a mouthful. And listens to complaints under these legislations while also creating educational tools in relation to access and privacy issues. She's very well suited for this position because she has been practicing law in New Brunswick for 24 years. And beside her is Jamie Rees, the Director and Chief Information Security Officer for the Government of New Brunswick. Now, I recently read in a profile of Jamie that he says his job is all about building trust. So Jamie is a career security practitioner and advocate with experience in telecommunications, financial services, and government organizations. Starting with a strong technical background as a systems administrator and IT instructor, he later moved to leadership roles, documenting and communicating the value of the security craft to secure funding for entire programs, including the Security Event Management Center he currently oversees at the Government of New Brunswick. Always looking to share, Jamie speaks on various security topics at events ranging from world and national congresses, regional conferences, and local chapters. So, welcome to GovMaker. So now Michael, of course, was our keynote right before lunch. So he is going to sit out the opening statement because I think we've all got a good understanding of what Michael's talking about. And so we're going to start with Anne. So Anne, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. So I'm really pleased actually to be here this afternoon. I've been following all of the discussion, and you stole mine. That's okay, I have other notes. I'll be happy to répondre aux questions en français s'il y en a dans la salle. Obviously, the Commissioner's Office is both right now running the 2 pieces of legislation that not only provide access to data, access to public government information, but also on the healthcare side. And we have, so my office oversight carries into the public sector and to the entire private and public healthcare sector. It's huge. We do have mandatory breach reporting in New Brunswick, and that's why I look really tired. There's we'll talk about that in a minute. But the role of the commissioner, because I was so pleased to be the first for New Brunswick, I really wanted to put in a good stamp on it. And I didn't want to approach it purely as a regulatory body because I knew that my counterparts across the country were having huge issues by just being regulatory. So being a good francophone from the peninsula, I decided, why don't we approach it with a view to make sure that the rules are well learned, are well understood and adopted and adapted in the workplace. So put basically the pushback right onto governments and healthcare providers to get to know what the law is and apply it. And my office would be seen as a facilitator, an educator to help with that. So even though we're now running into the over 600 investigations in 4 years, I can tell you that we resolve most cases now. 4 out of 5 are resolved. Privacy breaches are well investigated thoroughly, and we don't send the letters that you got. I'm so sorry. You would get a lovely report that would set out everything that we had come across. Very, very thorough investigations. They do take time, but we push for enforcement of measures when a privacy breach is bad. Snooping is bad, and there are repercussions in New Brunswick for that. What I like about this discussion today was my role is both access and privacy. So I'm this wonderful little conduit that has to think about access to information every day. And I also have to think about protection of privacy every day. So I'm always struggling to find this wonderful balance. I push for access to information with disclosure as a default. So if you're asking me, I will say government of the day, disclosure of the information is your default position. You should be saying to yourselves, why shouldn't I not give this out? The privacy element that comes through for most public departments is there sensitive data here that I need to watch out for? Do I need to be prudent? The rules of the law reflect what you all know. If there's something that clicks somewhere in your brain, I'm not sure if I should disclose this, you're probably quite right. Just pause, have a look at it, assess it, and then make a decision. But most of the information is not sensitive or confidential or personal, which brings me to the protection of privacy. Protection of privacy is not what we all think it is, or people saying privacy all the time is not probably the most commonly used word that's well employed. Information that protects privacy has to be personal. It belongs to an individual. It doesn't belong to government. It's not confidential information. It's not sensitive third-party private company information. Personal information belongs to the individual, and privacy lends itself to protection of that information. So just there, we're narrowing down, right, what we mean by privacy, what we mean by that concept. So the spirit and intent of the legislation is really to allow a good free flow of data from government and healthcare providers while protecting only what requires to be protected. I really enjoyed listening and about culture shift this morning as well, because I've been saying culture shift for 4 years. I didn't know I was popular in doing so. It's because it was a culture shift for me. I'm from the private sector, having been a lawyer in that realm for most of my life as a professional. So when I came to this job, I thought, wow, what's the issue? Governments are really, really good at collecting and hoarding the information to do their job. They're so good at it, they became the ultra protectors of the information. So my job is to shift away from that with allowing governments to understand that it's okay to open the doors, to open the drawers, to open the file system, and allow people who want to know what you're doing to know what you're doing. That change will come, but it will not come at the speed at which I heard this morning. Open data, all these wonderful things that are happening on the dashboard, I know at 150 miles an hour or 220 kilometers an hour, it cannot happen today, not in New Brunswick or elsewhere, without a methodical, logical, orderly fashion. Progress never has happened that way, because if we go too fast with this openness and open data and open government, we're going to get it wrong, and it's going to fall on our heads. So I like baby steps. I like nurturing, learning, and advancing. And what's really kind of cool about today is I can sit here after 4 years and say, I've seen progress in 4 years. Governments are starting to talk and answer questions and opening up their records. Only 9 to 10% of all access to information requests come to my office. That means 90% of them are doing really well. They don't even complain. And there's proactive disclosure that's not under the statute. And there's informal access happening every day, especially at the municipal level and at the school district level, and between doctors and nurses and their patients, etc. All that's positive. I will finish on this note. Open data, does it mean open information? Because open data to me doesn't really mean much. I'm a biologist before, so data to me was like the lab stuff that no one understood. I like to talk about open information, because information means you're informed, it has meaning and it's used for you. Translate that into open government. Open government means that information lets you understand what decisions they're making that involves your lives. So that to me is what this is all about. Thanks very much.
The floor is yours, Jim.
Thanks. I will just kind of revisit that notion of trust that you brought up when you introduced me earlier. I really do believe that my job is about trust, and whether it's getting an agency and a department to trust one another enough, or if it's having the citizens trust that the government is doing something properly, that is really the goal, I think. In order to be able to open data and allow access in some of the ways that we heard this morning, we need to have that trust. And I think both Michael in his keynote earlier and Ann just now mentioned, if we mess that trust up, it's already tenuous at best. Mm-hmm. And if we mess that up and we don't do it the right way, we'll be taking large steps backwards. So I think that's very important. For me, because of my particular experience, security is one of the aspects of helping build that trust. So it's the one that I like to talk about the most. I do not believe that security and open and transparent are mutually exclusive to one another. I actually think the security enables the openness and transparency. Now, that's not necessarily the traditional security person's stance, which because we have this intermingling of security being keeping things secret. And of course, we have to be able to do that in certain cases. We have certain bits of information that we shouldn't be sharing completely wide open, people's private information, etc. So we do need to make sure that we understand what information we're dealing with, and then we can develop rules on how we're going to treat it, whether we need to, like Ann said, keep pockets of it safe and secure, and then allow the rest out for use. The other thing, in a word of caution, we had a reference to Jurassic Park earlier today. So one of the other quotes that I like from that movie is, "We got so preoccupied with could we that we didn't think should we." And sometimes, the aggregation of data and releasing large swaths of things could have unintended consequences. So we do need to spend some time up front figuring out if we should. I believe that in most cases we should, but we do need to be making sure we're diligent in doing that extra work. So when we talk about confidentiality and secrets, that's one thing. It's actually just one aspect of security that I talk about with my friends in the industry, but it is one of the most expensive ones, right? Keeping something secret, where you store it or move it or use it, is very expensive. If we can limit the amount of stuff that we're keeping secret just by default, then we can actually invest in better security for the things we do need to keep secret and let some of the other stuff go. That isn't to say that security is not important in the open space as well. So though we're not going to keep that stuff secret, we actually still have to make sure the integrity is safe. We can't allow data, if we're going to open something up and allow businesses or researchers, people to come and use it, we have to make sure that that data stays, the integrity stays, so that it's not being changed and leading to faulty outcomes or people making bad investments, whatever it is. So that's a security aspect that we have to deal with. And the other one that gets overlooked often as a security feature is actually the availability of that data. So we can't open, say, here's a data source and it's open to the internet and come get it, and then you get the Slashdot or the Reddit effect and it's broke. The internet will swamp it and it'll be gone. Again, if people are depending on it for research and business driving things, we have to make sure that it's available. And of course, it's not just kind of infrastructure availability. It has to be available in a form that's usable, some kind of consistency across multiple data sets that are related, and those kinds of things have to be acknowledged as well. So those are the three big aspects of security and how I see they would fit into this kind of open data, open government framework.
Awesome, thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions to get us started, and then I'm going to look out here, and I hope to see lots of hands up. So my first question to the whole panel is, you guys are experts in security, and you've seen the crazy examples of data breaches and stuff. How do you personally live online? Like, how are you an online citizen?
Well, I'm a good case of do what I say, not what I do. So I'm pretty open. Although I must say I have a bit of a dividing line between sort of the truly personal and then, it's not a public persona so much, but the public online side of it. So I'm quite active, certainly on social media, on Twitter and the like, and I use Facebook, but really more on a professional level. So you won't see me tweet or push stuff out on Facebook. That's more on the personal side. So when you do see pictures of me on Facebook, it's usually because my wife and my kids have posted it and tagged me. It's not out of anything that I've done. I try to change my passwords regularly and the like, but like everybody, I don't do a very good job of it. The one thing that I do, though, that isn't as common and I think more people should do, is that I do encrypt email, at least from time to time. So I use PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, which is a standard email encryption program that you can use. And frankly, similar, I guess, Glenn Greenwald tells the story that when Snowden first contacted him, Snowden tried to walk him through using encrypted email, and Greenwald didn't know what this was and didn't want to spend the time to deal with it. And I think Snowden went through several times until it finally got to the point that he went through that process. I had a somewhat similar experience where I knew a friend, I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who had access to the WikiLeaks cables. And I was interested in the intellectual property cables to sort of get a better sense of what the US had been doing there. And so someone made the introduction, but they had insisted that I get PGP, and I was similar. I didn't know what they were talking about, and or I knew what they were talking about, but had never gone through that process.
Who would?
Well, I think a lot of people would or should.
Right.
I mean, if we think about the surveillance that takes place, one way to safeguard our privacy better is to encrypt.
And so these big NSA tools that they're using, these programs, they can't break those encryptions?
Well, they probably can. Well, not probably. They can, but it takes a lot more computing power to do that than it does for the standard stuff. So, their approach, and I must admit, it doesn't make any sense to me. Their approach is if they're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack, they just keep trying to build a bigger haystack. I don't know why that makes any sense, to be honest, but that's what they do. The stuff that's easy to get is the stuff that most likely is going to get processed. The stuff that is encrypted, if there is a reason to suspect, then they'll probably make efforts to decrypt. But I guess my view would be that ought to be the general standard anyway. I mean, so the idea that as a default, everybody's communication gets hoovered up strikes me as enormously problematic. I want them to have the power to go after stuff where there's a suspicion. I would rather that they didn't capture everybody even when they don't have that. And the active encrypting makes it less likely that you might be captured, but it's less likely they'll go to the effort to try to decrypt unless they've got a reason to do so.
Okay. So Anne, how do you live online?
I really live an open life. I don't like to live online per se.
Okay.
I'm also very careful because being the first privacy commissioner for New Brunswick, I think I would be tagged a lot. There's only 740,000 people in New Brunswick, and I'm related to half. So it's a bit of a problem. But
So you get tagged a lot in Facebook.
I'm not on Facebook. I can't speak in 40 characters or less, nor write. But I do keep up. I really watch what's going on. I'm a hawk for that. I'm very careful what I write in emails. I don't put stuff in email that I know might be hacked. So I think everything that I write will be hacked. So we protect. At my office, we protect stuff that we send. We test. We send test emails. We really, really are careful. And in my private life, it's the same. I've started to do online banking in the last few years with very really cute passwords that I change a lot. And I like to delete cookies. It's a lot of fun. I like to clear history. I know I sound terrible, but I'm just really
I use
careful.
a couple of different programs to help clean up cookies and
There.
block them on the way through.
Yeah,
God,
but
you
it's,
sound like a bake-off. What's your cookie recipe, Michael?
yeah,
I find them very tough to avoid. I mean, just the convenience factor. So there's some certain organizations that I find the websites put on cookies, and so
There's a few
I don't
now.
want them, but some, I mean, it's convenient enough that I live with.
There's a few now. If you go onto an online catalog and you want to look at the things, if you don't have a cookie turned on, you won't get the image. So the experience is broken, and of course they know that, and that's why it's being done that way to drive you. On the email point, we've often had this conversation. That email is really the same as putting a postcard in the mailbox. You've written something, in a legible language. Every person that picks from that box and every hop between now and the receiver's mailbox on the other end can flip that card open and read it. There's nothing. Right? So Michael's point about having some kind of encryption, at least for certain emails, perhaps, and I have had a PGP key for a long time as well. You can use it to at least wrap an envelope around it. It is a little harder, perhaps, and at least you're not sucked up into that we see everything mode unless they really want to actually come and look at it. Something interesting, I saw one of the courts ruled in the States that you can be compelled to turn over your biometrics, but not your password that you know. So it's a very interesting thing. So, if you're protecting things with passwords, may actually have just gotten a boost, even though we would traditionally, technically wise, think they were weaker. Court-wise, at least in some jurisdictions, they might end up being stronger. That's not a Canadian thing yet, but it was an interesting read. I'm a nerd. I used the internet since before there was a www. We had Gopher and Archie and Veronica and bulletin board systems and those kinds of things. So we've kind of watched that thing grow. What's very interesting is many of the same challenges exist now online as did way back then. people still want to try to get your password. They still want to spread malware to you. They still will try to, impersonate you online. All of that kind of stuff. Before, maybe it was a little more joke-based and prankster-based, and now it's much more, and you see the news stories every day, things are driven by organized crime and nation states and all those kinds of things. So that certainly the scope has changed, but a lot of the issues are the same, though exploded. I use some of those cookie deleters and blockers. I use no scripts and ad blockers and those kind of things on certain websites. You can kind of, if you're visiting often, you learn to trust them a little more, and you let more stuff in. But it's very tough. But largely, I rely, for example, on online shopping. I know that I'm not going to be held accountable by my credit card company for more than $50. So I have a protection built in that's not offered to me by the vendor necessarily, but by the card issuers that I rely on in some sense to protect me. And I've had to have it happen now. Similar to what Anne's statement was, as the Chief Information Security Officer for an organization, you're always thinking, look, if my password gets compromised or something happens to me, that's going to look really dumb, right? But it's going to happen to anybody. It's just almost impossible to miss clicking the wrong thing sometimes, right? Especially when it's just all online in there. So we can't let that scare us. Right. We have to be cognizant of it, and we have to work through it, and we have to put protections in place for ourselves. But I think it's
Still have to live.
we still have to live, and more increasingly we have to live online to do the things we want to do.
I know we keep talking about a cultural shift in institutions, but individually we have to make that cultural shift as well, and the acceptance of what we will be online, right?
Yeah, there's a famous, it's probably not famous until right now, line. If you don't connect, you're going to be left behind. And,
right.
That's why a lot of grandparents are they're doing FaceTime and they're Skyping with their grandchildren in Fort McMurray because they won't see these people, and it's wonderful. I like that aspect of the connection, cross generations now. So we don't we're not left behind. Yeah.
Yes, and for the mandatory, this is my kid's experience, my 8-year-old Skypes with our entire family because we have no family here in New Brunswick. And it is for her like they are in the room, right? Like it's not
My security feature for FaceTime and Skype is a little post-it note over the camera on my iPad. I know. I get
my mother uses Kleenex.
Oh, you use Kleenex?
My mother uses Kleenex.
With some of the stories of them, folks being able to turn cameras on remotely, it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that.
Yeah, because I knew that.
All right, well, so that's sort of like what it's like to be a citizen online. So now my next question, and then I promise that the floor gets a question. What is the skill set you think we need from the practitioners of opening up that data and protecting the privacy in our institutions, both public and private? And I don't just mean the technological skill set, because I think it actually is about integrity and that moral compass, and that's a new type of skill we need to, because you're being asked to figure out how do you open data, but where are the limits to, or I don't even know if limit's the right word, but you know what I'm saying. Like, how do we go through this, in legal terms, very much a blue sky environment?
Question. I guess I'd raise just a couple of things that I hope they address. First off, I actually do think you have to be online and in these environments. And so, I respect that you'd rather not, that you've got issues that you don't want to be on Facebook and Twitter. I must say, we did at the University of Ottawa at one point in time a panel with several of the privacy commissioners from across the country. I think Jennifer Stoddard at the time was the federal commissioner, and Kavukian was there. And one of the issues was, it was actually my colleague Ian Kerr that paired the commissioners with teenagers. And they started talking about their experiences. And actually, as part of it, the commissioners, I think David Lucadelis, who at the time was the BC commissioner as well, spent the prior month, for some that hadn't spent time on Facebook, and in some of these other environments. And frankly, I think some of them came away from that recognizing that actually it was essential. I mean, at a federal level, the privacy commissioner has faced multiple complaints with respect to Facebook, and social media related issues comes up regularly. I think that governments generally have to jump in with both feet. I don't think it's something that frankly can be avoided if you're going to engage actively. The problem, and this would sort of tie into the second thing, that the challenge that I think government faces, and this, at least as someone living in Ottawa, so I guess I hear a lot about what's happening at the federal level, is that you don't get rewarded very much for being innovative, but you certainly do get punished politically or reputation-wise where there's a screw-up. And you know there's going to be screw-up. We just heard that there's this likelihood of some of that potential screw-up. And sort of that cultural problem within government about making it very difficult, disincentivizing in a sense, innovation, because there is a risk that something could go wrong, and so you're going to be on the cover of the local paper because there was that screw-up, represents an enormous roadblock, as far as I could tell, for the kind of adoption rates that I think are necessary. I mean, it's not that I'm looking for government to fail, but if we take a look at many of the businesses and others that have succeeded, failure is recognized as being part of that culture. And part of success includes some amount of appetite for recognizing that not everything is going to work out the way you hope all the time. At a governmental level, at least again, I speak from a federal perspective, experiencing what I experienced in Ottawa for the last 15 years, that's just not the environment. And so the choice, if given the choice between being innovative and sort of taking the conventional path, sort of the best you'll get is the pilot project, right? So if it doesn't go wrong, you say, well, it's just a pilot project. But that willingness to kind of jump in with both feet is often not there, in part because culturally the risk is seen as too great. And I think we have to find a way to combat that.
What about you, Anne? What's the skill set we need?
Well, I'm glad that you're spending time in New Brunswick because we're a little bit, I think, more positive in our approach. We're small here, which is a huge advantage. We really work well as a group. Here, the skill sets for me would be, first, you got to love information. You got to be a geek. I love
I think these are your people,
Yeah.
nerds and geeks, I believe. We had a hands.
I'm
We
going
can
to
see
like
quite a
you.
lot
Is
of.
that cool? I have an emergency cool card for my son if my coolness is challenged. And I'm not kidding.
If you have that card, I think it just was challenged.
You have to be a geek about the info. You got to have really good logical sense on how to collect it and put it into your record. So first is having to a really, really sound records management system, electronic. Like we're also facing huge challenges from a paper-based world here, and this is not unique to New Brunswick. Where you're shifting from paper-based to electronic data, and that's difficult. But to me, it's the logical approach to how you record the information to allow for access. The second skill set, have good judgment and common sense. If you have that, you will be successful. It's very, very clear to me that when people look at information, based on the investigations today, they say, Madame Bertrand, I don't think we could put this information out. And I said, what made you think that? Well, blah, 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 blah. Well, you were right. So it's good judgment, common sense, and sometimes we use legislation or the law as a weapon to not allow for open data or not allow for disclosure, proactive disclosure. But that's just because we're not sure of the law, the codified rules. But really the rules are common sense based, good judgment and logical thought. And bringing those skill sets will really be helpful.
And Jamie, what are you looking for? Yeah, I think it's interesting because, of course, you come from the technological, you are a data guy, but you've been working in this world that has moral ambiguity, which isn't usually what you find in computer science.
So people forgot how to play somewhere along the way. You know, maybe it's beat out of us in our work day to day. Not that doesn't happen in my job, but you know, it could happen as my boss is over there. But
Christian,
seriously,
a kinder
you know,
workforce, please.
we kind of forget what it's like to go and just poke around at things and you know, take a pile of Lego and build something interesting. Or my son, he turned 6 a couple of weeks ago, and he likes to imagine. He actually has a notebook, his little Hilroy notebook, and he writes down Ben's ideas, and he writes down things that he wants to build into video games because he loves video games, Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog and all those guys, of course. And then he whips out the iPad, and he's using Scratch Junior to try to build a platformer. But he's not like reading a manual. And if I click that, he's just dragging stuff up. He's playing, and he's learning organically how to build this thing out. And he's somewhere along the line, folks kind of forget what that's like.
So
I
not
think
being afraid.
you can't be afraid
play.
to try things, and we have to have a little bit of leeway to let people try things and fall flat. Hopefully, it's not like a huge pancake, but we have to have some stumbling blocks along the way. That's how we make ourselves better at anything. Certainly, whatever, through 25 years or some technology that I've been working on, I've tried all kinds of stuff and built things, and they didn't work out exactly the way I wanted them to. And you kind of recover from that and make things better. So learning how to play or not be afraid to take some chances is important. Anne mentioned earlier kind of that intuition. If you think something is right or wrong, you're probably right about it. Or at least you should listen to that little voice. And that's another thing that maybe as we get older, people kind of get drummed out of them. We have some kind of intuition in the back of our heads that speaks to us, and we can understand more sometimes from listening to those little quiet voices necessarily than listening to people that are shouting from the rooftops.
Awesome. All right, so hands, yes, right there.
I think I will come to the mic.
Oh, okay.
Even though my husband would allege that no one would ever have a problem hearing me, I'll just step up. On Friday, I read an interesting blog post. It was 2 contributors to Slate, and they're now parents. And they made the case that they will never put a picture of their child on the internet, nor will they ever talk about their child on the internet. And it wasn't for the reasons why we normally think. It's not because they're afraid of online predators. It's because they're looking forward into the future and realizing that all the data that's going online today about a particular person, there will be algorithms developed, there will be face recognition software, we will be able to paint a complete, well, I won't say complete, but there will be a pretty solid picture of this individual long before this individual can consent to this data being out there. And it occurs to me as I sort of listen today that mom and dad are doing this very good intentionally. They're posting pictures of Junior doing adorable things, and they're talking about how Junior did this and that and the other thing. And if this is all building an identity for Junior that later health insurance people can look at, and future employers can look at, and university admissions officers can look at, and maybe it's going to have, there's going to be organizations I can't even dream of right now that are going to have access to that information. What obligations do we have to those vulnerable populations? And on one hand, it's around, we can look at it from the open data perspective and getting back to how difficult it is for people to remain truly anonymous, especially when you're from small pools of people where it's pretty easy to identify, right up to what obligations do parents have to protect the information that they're sharing about someone who hasn't given consent for that information to be shared. So
yeah.
I'll leave that open to discussion.
All right, so.
I can start off. I think what you've hit on there is that privacy means different things to different people. And it never ceases to amaze me how colorful the whole spectrum of privacy has become. To those at one end that will share nothing and do nothing and be very careful and live in a very isolated way, to those who put absolutely everything on what I affectionately call the airwaves. So in that, I can't even as commissioner would ever profess to direct people on what the rules should be, because it's a very personal thing. I can give consent to sharing some of my personal information, and Jimmy would not share that same information in his world, right? So it's we can't be, the regulators, the oversight bodies, the experts should not be telling people on how to govern their private lives. What we should be doing is indicating to them what the repercussions are for doing certain things that might affect privacy if they didn't know, and how to secure it, or what are the benefits of sharing certain information when I think of health research, health data research in an anonymized way. So it's, I think it would be very imprudent for a privacy commissioner and experts to give out that kind of directive. But to be helpful and give good guidance would be much better.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the internet never forgets, even though we do, and so that changes the dynamic, I think, for a lot of people. I think when once you're a bit older, then those are choices people make, and it's that they make the choices they make, as you just suggested. I've talked sometimes with students when we talk about social media use, and they talk about the Sunday morning cleanup, where they clean up anything, their Facebook page from the Friday night and the Saturday night just before, where they may have been tagged or may have said things that employers wouldn't otherwise want. And certainly when they go through the interview process, let's say for law jobs, they certainly go through their social media profiles, and they try to ensure that it's customized, let's say, for that audience. And so I think there is a recognition that they want to be themselves and be open, but at the same time, there are others who may look askance at some of the stuff that they do. That said, just one quick last thing. I would note that I suspect over time that the parents that you cite, let's say from the Slate article, will find that our expectations will change too. So so they're looking at it through the prism of their own experience. Say, wow, if everything I did when I was a kid or a teenager was posted for the world to see, boy, that would be embarrassing, kind of thing. And everybody can probably relate to things that, if they were tweeting out their lives back, if there had been Twitter back when they were a kid, they'd say, boy, this could prove to be quite embarrassing. I suspect that over time, if we do increasingly live in a world when that stuff is out there, and I look at my kids who are younger, and they are out there and doing this sort of stuff, we try to educate them on the implications, but these are choices they make. I think that our societal expectations of the meaning of what you did when you were 10 or 15 on a Facebook page will change alongside. And I'm hopeful, maybe it's too optimistic, but I'm hopeful, and I actually genuinely think that we will be far more forgiving of that sort of thing, even if you can find it through the Wayback Machine or through Google or something like that, recognizing that society as a whole was living online in that way, and that you don't cast judgment. In the same way we wouldn't have cast judgment on someone for something they did knowing that we couldn't have found it, we similarly wouldn't for stuff that they did at a time when they were younger.
Parenting issues are always very personal, and I'm guilty of putting my pictures of my children up when they compete in a sports event or they do something I think is interesting. And I type the same kind of, hey, look, isn't this wonderful, and post it. And it's a very good point. In a way, I am taking away from them the ability to choose what their life story is that gets out onto the internet to a certain point.
Right.
When we're talking about those things. We talk a lot about educating kids, and certainly a parent, myself, I sit with them sometimes and try to explain that not only does the internet never forget, sometimes it actively amplifies it when you're trying to make them forget, the so-called Streisand effect, where you bring up, try to have something removed, and it just makes it worse, and they'll dogpile on you. It's a schoolyard mentality in some cases, for sure. So I try to bring that up. Maybe we need to also have some classes or some kind of facility for parents to be able to get some information, to be able to talk to their kids in that space. So that, yeah, so the parents can have some guidance. And then, it's not a rule. You can't tell them you must do this, but here's some guidance, some things you can think about yourself if you want to have this conversation with your children. And then you can decide you want to put them online or not online. I tend to agree with Michael about the idea that at some point we're going to kind of say, you know what, that person was 15 and it's really not that big a deal in 2040 or whatever that they did this thing. And I've also done stupid things as a teenager that, would be embarrassing to
And I think we're also, in assessing it that way, we are assessing the situation from our experience rather than their experience as adults judging that content. I live online, my husband lives online, my husband is a photojournalist, so my child has the best minor softball photos of any kid on Facebook. And so Alexandra lives online by virtue of the fact that we live online. But she is now 8 years old, and for well over a year, Alexandra has been deeply engaged in how we present her online. And she tells us.
She's 8?
She's 8. So now she's an example of a child who's being raised by two people who are in that space and comfortable in that space. However, this is the reality for these children. She was born in 2005. She is the same age as the iPad. And so that is her reality. She sees us living online. She wants to be there with us because her parents are there. So I think we also have to recognize that the children themselves are developing a different conception of what it means to be online than we have.
They also have to combat this idea that everything online is a personal brand. You see these stories of the Justin Biebers and those types of things where they start as a YouTube account and all of a sudden it looks like all of a sudden they're overnight famous and rich, you know, and so that's a very strong pull for young people.
That is a strong pull. Question?
I want to build off what Jamie, you had said a little bit earlier, credit card protection. So is there equivalent of protection from harm when my private information gets used in a way that I don't want it to be used? And I'm interested in this question. It's sort of building off my question for Dr. Guys a little bit earlier. The fact that we make such a big deal about protecting private information, but we do nothing when something does go wrong. You know, so it sort of feels to me like it's been a very, very unbalanced focus on preventing our information to be out there, when really we should also start to shift it towards my nephews, same as old as the iPad, they know the convenience, the great value of being connected. But there's so little talk about what happens when something goes wrong, whether the bad parties are being punished appropriately, etc., and whether I can get excused from it. So is there equivalent of, you know, for example, if my prospective employer decides to look in my LinkedIn profile without my permission and then decides not to hire me, can I have a case to sue them for that?
So
just want to hear what.
I'll just make a quick comment because I'm more familiar with kind of the financial side of that question that I mentioned earlier. Basically what I'm doing is transferring my risk to the credit card company. I'm not sure, and I'll let these folks comment further on whether you can transfer your own personal identity risk. It's not a thing that I've seen before. But
I'll go to the second part of your question, and I think it'll go back to the comments we had heard earlier. When it comes to identity theft, there are modes to protect yourself. Obviously, I don't know if you guys know about that, but to go after the offender, the options are to lodge a complaint with the privacy commissioner, provincially, federally, etc. The privacy commissioners have enforcement powers insofar as to the forensic analysis of what happened, where the target problem was, measures to be put in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. Will that then equate or translate into liquidated damages like we call in the legal world? No. But if that's not your end game, terrific, because you want to stop the offending act. You want to correct those errors. However, the tort of privacy in a court of law is something that is quite removed from that as well. You have to prove an expectation of privacy in order to actually claim damages and be rewarded damages if you're successful. And that's a completely different form in the civil court. Privacy commissioners can recommend, in my case, we recommend disciplinary action be considered, terminations, things like that, and offenses under the Act These are provincial offenses that call for fines or imprisonment if
Oh, it's
the
me.
fines are not paid. So there are levels that we can go to. The case we had last summer, a very highly public, the doctor snooping case into the patient files of 142 women. He was targeting women. He wanted to know their ages. He wanted to know what they had in their medical files. It was just gross. And we recommended disciplinary action, fines being imposed, and those recommendations are being followed. I cannot discipline. I'm not the employer. I'm not a judge. I can't impose a fine. But I can recommend that they go in that direction based on the severity. So things are being done. I don't want you to leave this room thinking that things are not done, because they do get done.
All right, we got time probably for one. Okay, right there. Look at this, bucking the trend. Everyone's going to the mic.
I know. It's lovely, actually.
Can everyone? Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to talk more about everything that we don't post. So more like you were talking about PGP and encryption, and there's a whole other kind of spectrum of people worrying about, oh, my government is spying on me, like the NSA. But there's also people that are very worried and aren't online as much. But there's more like, I tend towards like, spy on me, go for it, you know. And Leo Laporte is kind of a front runner in this on the Twit network, and he says, you know what, I'll be the guinea pig for future generations, spy on me. You know, I don't think people are going to care. I don't think my government is going to care if I'm divorced, or if I have this conversation with, you know, my kids or something. My government is not looking for that. So why not just, you know, spy on me? If you're going to take encryption from PGP, if you're going to take the Tor network, if they're going to gather all that, what's the point of really trying to hide that stuff? So my question is, how does that all come together? Because a lot of stuff is put. If I put a picture on Facebook, yeah, I did that. If I'm being spied on, I didn't do that. But do I care? Not quite sure that I do sometimes, because it's going to happen anyway. So where is that kind of balance between all that?
Well, that's the Scott McNeely, who used to be the CEO of Sun, saying you have no privacy, get over it. I'm not at this stage, I'm not willing to get over it. I do think that, I mean, obviously people make whatever choices they want, and they can essentially say, throw up their hands and say, I've got nothing to hide. You know, my response often is, well, it's twofold. First off, if you've got absolutely nothing to hide, you've got an incredibly boring life. Because I think, frankly, everybody has something to hide, and it's not that they've done anything wrong. It's that if I ask everyone to tell me their salary or take off all their clothes, people aren't going to want to do either of those things right here. And it's not because they've got nothing to hide. I mean, we've got bodies, we'll make a salary of some sort. It's personal, and why should I? And so we don't necessarily want that disclosed. In terms of the potential misuse by government of this kind of information, I do think that there are threats. I look at the kinds of social networks that are out there, and the ability to make inaccurate inferences about me, because I don't think, I'm not doing anything wrong as far as I know, and I think that I'm kosher. Everything's okay. But I told you, I had this email with a friend of a friend of a friend that knew people at the WikiLeaks thing. Who knows? Somebody who tracks my email starts looking at those inferences and say, hey, this person is somehow connected with this person. There might be something there worth taking a look at. Oh, and by the way, I emailed with several people in this room here. We're organizing this event, and so suddenly they're now connected to me, and so perhaps they're somehow connected in the same sort of way. When you think about the kind of social graph that gets created, and I'm not talking solely about Facebook, I'm talking about the social graph in terms of our day-to-day communication, we really are in that sort of Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation world, and a world in which all of this gets aggregated and collected, and there is that ability for someone to begin to peep at and begin to make assumptions and sometimes inaccurate presumptions about things that we are doing. The implications that can follow from that are pretty significant. My father, for example, was going down to Florida a few weeks ago and ended up 3 hours in secondary screening in the US for reasons that he's still not sure about. but somehow there was some inaccurate inference that caused him no small amount of stress and perhaps more. So I do think that there are risks there. Sometimes they're unseen. And I think that in a free and democratic society, the ability to make make the choices about what we want or don't want to be made publicly available should be ours to make.
I think it's a really cool comment on your part because you've thought about it. This is not something that is a knee-jerk reaction. You've actually thought about it. You're okay with it. You're very at ease. And the nice thing about privacy, as I indicated earlier, it's very personal. But it doesn't mean that you need to remain in that realm all your life. But you may change next month, next year. But I don't want to live in a world that has to worry about Big Brother and the conspiracy theories of the communist regime among U.S. citizens back in the 60s and things like that. We don't want that. We want to be able to share stuff. We used to share photographs and albums and books and history about ourselves when we talked on the porches, which I told my lunch mates, the automatic garage opener was the great killer of community involvement because people would click the garage door opener, go right into their garage, close the door. No one knows their neighbors. No one are talking to each other, and the front verandas are gone. No one is talking. We used to talk, as we're doing now on social media. We've replaced the porch. We've done away with the garage door opener. We're having these wonderful conversations. So I like the idea that people are on there. I do want that kind of world. It's going to enrich our lives. So good on you.
All right, Jamie, we have 2 minutes.
Sure. We have a system, a bunch of mechanisms, legal and otherwise, that allow law enforcement and other bodies to be able to ask for permission to gather information during a investigation of some kind. And I wholeheartedly support their ability to be able to do that when they have reason to believe that somebody's up to no good. I certainly want to live in a place that I feel safe and things are being, investigated and the bad guys are being taken care of. I also don't want to have to live someplace where I have to worry about everything that I say being taken out of context or the people I say it to linking me to some thing in some 6 degrees of separation problem. So I would rather that they follow the procedures that they have. And in the essence of kind of this open data and open government idea, I think they should, to some extent, have to tell us. No secret courts and no secret panels that exist to say, yeah, sure, just put a tap on that line and listen to everything. I think they should still have to make their case, and they should still have to be beholden to the citizens to make sure they're doing the right things.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to our fabulous panel, and thank you for the great questions and for listening. So, onward.